And welcome to Critical Insights. Today we're going to be talking about resiliency and specifically a particular conversation around backup. And when I talk about backup, usually people think about the idea of backup being just a place to store stuff in case of a disaster occurs. Well, I want to change kind of how you think about that. You think about the question of why are you doing backups? The reason we tend to do backups is because we're trying to figure out what we need to have in case a disaster occurs. So I'm going to change the words here a little bit to the idea of recovery. And if you look at the idea of recovery and what that does, it changes perspective. We talk about how fast we can get it. We talk about what is the tiering of the data. In other words, what needs to come first, what needs to go second. And also things around latency. Where is the data located? Is it sitting here on SSDs in the data center, or is it sitting out in the cloud someplace? So you ask yourself the question is, when a disaster occurs, what do we need to make sure that we have in place to make sure that we're able to recover when we need to? And that include actually, when you think about recovery during that time, we're actually talking about the idea of using pencil and paper. So some of the things can actually be done during that time. So when you think about resiliency, we have to take a look at what we can do to protect that data. And part of that also identifies the process by which you declare a disaster, what we call the governance process. And so you define a person within that organization that has the power to push the big red button that says, we have a disaster and we're going to recover. And then from there you define what that data needs to be recovered, what is that data that needs to be recovered, and start going through that process. So I guess when I take a look at the infrastructures and I see a lot of the different organizations that existed that's happened over the 20 plus years that I've been in the business, a lot of people look at the idea of a place to store the data on cheap hard drives that exist or on tapes that happen to be within the file cabinet that happens to be in the office. When you think about disasters and when they occur, that's probably not the best place to store this stuff. What you want to do is to set it up in such a way that you can be fast to it, you have capability of accessing and being able to respond to those particular disasters and get yourself back up and running. So again, when you're looking at the infrastructure and you're identifying what is important to you, that's the focus of what you need to concentrate on as it relates to recovery. So take a look at the business process, the identify the workflow, understand what can be done with paper, what can be done if certain things happen. If the infrastructure just totally dies, what can you do? So think about it from that perspective. And then from there, you're going to be able to set up tiering. This is the most important bit of data. That needs to be recovered first. This is the fastest stuff. Here's the other set of data that we can kind of wait for. Thinking about regulatory, you're talking about customer satisfaction needs, all of those things that you're trying to accomplish, you need to go through that process and set up that tiering. And again, the final part of the governance system is to identify somebody that actually can define, we have a disaster and we're going to move forward. So that's kind of the fundamentals of what the resiliency conversation is all about. What I wanted to do is also think about what we can start thinking about in reference to actions. What can we start doing that? Look at your organization and understand if the internet goes down, is that a problem? If power goes down, is that a problem? If data gets corrupted through some sort of ransomware attack or something happens like what happened a couple of weeks ago in reference to CrowdStrike, how will you be able to respond? So do we go through the process of virtualization of some of those servers? Do we create Docker containers, Kubernetes, creating some sort of packaging methodology? Do we use things like Terraform to be able to deploy to multiple clouds? What do we do in that process? So when you go through and you think about your organization, start with the idea of that business value of what it does and what the technology is trying to accomplish, and then start to think about how you can go through and recover from each of those particular scenarios. If you want to go into a little bit more, or actually a lot more into this conversation and understand how we can take a look at your organization, of what you're doing and what you can do to protect yourself across all these scenarios, by all means, let's have a conversation. My name is Paul Danis. Again, I'm a strategic advisor for Critical Insights. Thank you and have a wonderful day.